Make every night a wonderful journey, no matter where you are. Good night, sweet dreams. The first story, holder of oceans lost. In any city, in any country, go to any mental institution or halfway house you can get yourself into. When you reach the front desk, tell the clerk you wish to taste from water's purest. The clerk will say oceans lost, and point over your shoulder towards the farthest possible door. It will be green, old and decked with thick, snake-like padlocks. Do not ask him for assistance, such as the key to gain entry where you will risk a fate worse than death. Instead, walk to the door, facing forward, until you are in touching of the padlocks. Whisper the words, "Waters fall in darkest times," through the keyhole. It should be just about visible between the chains, and the locks will release, clattering dully to the floor. Once inside, it will be dark. The ground will gradually become steep the further you walk in, till it is swallowed up by lapping water. Now you must patiently wade through the cold waters. Heaping your hands in the air to place upon below the depths is to invoke a curse drowned long ago, in the place where you now stand, and the water will only grow colder the longer you take. So keep moving with arms raised, until you reach a large stone passageway. Now is the dilemma. You must go under to reach the other side. The curse is real. Do not trust your feelings that it may be a lie. Hands up and slowly duck yourself under. There will be barely enough room, but your hands will be able to run across the ceiling of the stone arch. You are almost there. The water on the other side is blue. Bright and pure. Now you may place your palms into the water and splash them vigorously. Soon a statue will rise from the depths holding a bowl which must be filled. Cup a handful of water and drop it into the bowl. Now dive to the bottom of the water and stay there for as long as possible, taking not a single glance up to where you came. When you can take no more, and there is no guarantee you will have been under long enough, emerge to face your face. You've done right. The statue will be gone, leaving behind it a jug filled with water, which shines brighter than anything else on this earth. Fail and you see what really lurks beneath the tides of these lost and ancient oceans. Holding the jug in both hands, close your eyes and take one single sip of its contents. When you open them again, you will be outside, drenched to the bone, holding the jug. The jug is Object 77 of 538. The waves of ancient oceans now run in your veins. Never bring the objects together. The second story, the derelict, an alleged photograph of the hole in the wall. Did I scare you? Sorry. I was just unsettled when we reached that mall. There's a reason why I don't like dark places nowadays. Come on, I'll tell you the story over coffee. There was a fabled hole in the wall located somewhere here in Providence that seemed to be the center of controversy. Hitchhikers and night wanderers often pass by the hole, only to be haunted by whatever malignant force lay inside. Now officials have started investigations to lessen the brush fire it caused with the our media. The most interesting of these cases are those that ended in madness. Almost 50 cases of hallucinations, delusions and schizophrenia were all caused by that eponymous hole in the wall. The hole was located on the side of an ancient stone derelict. The strangest thing about the derelict and the hole in the wall was their origins. No one had claimed the thing as a historical monument, even though the thing obviously looked as if it was older than dirt. The surrounding areas seemed to have less people each day. I was there, and I saw a few shops being torn down. Businesses were failing. Over 2 years ago, Before I met you, I was still a novice writer and a mundane schoolteacher living in nearby Arkham, and I heard the story from a friend, so I traveled all the way to Providence to investigate this strange hole in the wall. At first, I decided to look around and see the stability of the civilians living near the derelict. I'm no doctor, but I saw something in their faces, that something was sucked out from them. Energy or life force or something like that. I interviewed a few families who encountered that hole in the wall, which, they tell me, is strongest at night, though even in day it was not impotent, which was why the derelict was abandoned in the first place. People couldn't linger there. For long, most who tried almost died, and certainly had problems in their heads afterwards. I interviewed a few people, most of them the maddened, catatonic survivors of the ills that plagued the derelict. I can't tell you how unsettling it was to talk to them. Some of them refused to make eye contact, while others couldn't even speak. Those usually stared into space. A few told their tales, and it always ended in the same way, in some kind of terror that rippled through the air, and a strange blast of horror. The victims started running away, only to see some nameless dread creeping from the shadows. Oh, good, you ran out laughing. I thought you would. I didn't recall anyone whom I told this story to take it seriously, but I've known you for a while now, and both of us have a strange tendency to enjoy the more horrifying things in life. Honey, you know I've read of that guy Stephen King and his predecessor, Lovecraft, and how they talk about them places in the universe with strange things lurking behind them people. And those stories often go mad from the unknowable horrors behind these tears in reality. Who could have known that all of these were happening around that little hole in the wall? I found myself thinking more and more of the hole in the wall and its unknowable origins, and I shudder when I do. I used to have dreams of that hole and the things that lurk behind it, and I shudder again. I shudder because whatever thing I imagine does not add up to whatever thing hid behind that blanket of darkness. I do not believe my mind could comprehend the strange, alien things that hid in that hole in the wall. In that darkness, there was nothing, and there was everything. After a day of sleepless nights, my battered self decided to know what was inside the dark hole. Was something lurking down there, looking at me with eldritch eyes. I had to know. God help me. Oh, I had to know. When I started to sleep again, the hole tortured me in my dreams. I cracked, and I bought a gun to kill whatever thing may have inhabited the hole. It was the most foolish thing I have ever done, and to this day, I should have known to leave the maddening thing alone. I drove there at night, in the pouring rain. A drunk saw me on foot, walking up the path that led to that derelict. He told me repeatedly to stop what I was doing and get the hell out of there. He tried to stop me with words, but to no avail. After repeated arguments, the man just stood there as I walked a few steps forward. From him I heard a strange moaning sound, and I took a look back to see what was wrong. The abomination standing behind me was a strange caricature of the drunk, only the creature had more eyes and smiles under the rain and the pale moonlight. I saw what seemed to be mouths replacing the thing's eyes, and a huge, pallid eye in the place of a human mouth. The head was convulsing from side to side, and the aberration moaned as its head recklessly jerked from one side to another. Its limbs were nothing but appendages with mouths, and a black mass of feelers constituted as his legs. The thing was looking at me, and with a demon I see, guttural groan, it spoke. He who walks behind the Roshi who wails beyond the wall, he who speaks with sullen screams. He has many names, and in the darkness he waits. In the darkness he waits. In the darkness he waits. It spoke of the madness that waited beyond that dark, desolate hole, of which I saw in my dreams rectangular, and large enough for a man to fall into, and it sometimes said the names of the dreadful things I conjured up in my sleep. It beckoned me to leave. It reached out to me with one rubbery appendage, and I almost screamed with fear at that eldritch thing. When I heard the song of the derelict, it told me to kill the thing. Shoot it, the derelict whispered, it as bad. I looked back at the maddening guardian and shot it in the eye. The derelict was singing to me. It easily could have been the wind. Sometimes it moans, sometimes it whispers, but I knew whatever things haunted that stone thing were trying to talk to me. They spoke of different worlds, of cyclopean ranges, of eldritch proportions, geometries that shamed Euclid. It was something that would cause an normal man to lose his sanity, and at that moment I almost did, yet I pulled through, bearing the rain and the voices. Come closer, they whispered. I pushed through, flashlight in hand. The whispers and moans became nothing more than war. It was like a siren in the hands of a dying man. With a few more steps, I reached at the hole. I pointed my dying light at the object that haunted me so in restless dreams. For a split second, I saw the madness that had stalked me, a body full of wrong and nothing right aberrations that freeze the blood, sounds that would have driven a man into his very death. And in the madness of this gnawing cavity, this void of reality, this thin place, I heard it speak my name. I heard it cackle, and it beckoned me to stay with it, to meet its master, the true God of the void. I fired again, the nameless dread that lived in the rectangular hole screen, and for once I beheld the births of negative suns and empty earths, of black universes where nothing existed and everything existed. I saw, at the dim and icy center of the universe, the sleepy madness, the true opposite of everything. You understand opposites, right? Hot and cold, love and hate, light and dark. But these are not opposites, these are the lack of something. A lack of heat leads to coldness. A lack of love, your love brings me to hatred. A lack of light does not let me see. But this was different. This was the true opposite, the antithesis of everything in order. It was chaos incarnate. Before I went insane, I was forced back into this world. I found myself in the car. My gun wasn't with me, and it body lay where the drunk turned, shot to death. The keys were in the ignition, and the derelict was not there. Something felt different about the place. It felt, strangely, safer, better. The torn reality between the realm of sanity and madness was repaired in Providence, Rhode Island, on that day. But the nightmares kept coming. That was 2 years ago. Things changed. The place was lost forever. Last I heard of it, the place where the derelict was built upon was turned into a shopping mall. And after that, I never heard of it again. Do you believe that even the tightest repairs on fabric can easily fall apart? Again, that mall we passed by looks like it's running out of business. And I have been having the dreams again. The third story. Dark place. Stop. Stop. Please stop. Don't he do this. Please don't do this. He couldn't hear any of them. Maybe he couldn't hear it. Maybe he chose not to. He couldn't hear the frantic voices surrounding him on all sides. She couldn't hear the pleading, couldn't feel the hands tightly grasping his arms and pulling with all their might. A number of his deceased classmates, many of whom he hadn't had any contact with in some time, tightly wrung his arms. It didn't matter that he hadn't spoken with them often. or that they never seemed to care for him that much. He was still a good kid. He didn't deserve something like this. Nobody did. His aunts, uncles, grandparents, and a few of his lazy idols slapped and beat him, or at least tried. Their hands just passed through him like air. He might feel a bit of a draft, but nothing more. Goddamn you, what the fuck do you think you're doing? We taught you better than this, we taught you better. They had been with him all his life, cheering him on in the good times and doing their best to comfort him. They gave him his privacy when he indulged in some of his more eccentric appetites. Nothing he could ever do would sully their image of him. In life and death alike, they had watched him grow from a darling young child to a happy, outgoing young man with a lot of promise. But this was different. He was going to lose everything if they couldn't get to him somehow. Hit him, drop something on him, make some noise and get his father to come check on him. Anything to keep him from this. Everyone in the room, relatives, friends, and acquaintances alike, started to cry. It was painful to see him like this. It was agonizing to see him in so much pain, and over nothing, at that. Despite his best efforts, he'd always been a little eccentric. It endeared him to some people, but it caused him some trouble. As well, he had irresponsible tendencies that made him fall behind in school. He was a bit loud when he told his jokes, and it began to get on some people's nerves. He had a really short temper, and it caused him to do bad things. He destroyed and damaged. He yelled, he hurt the endangered. He had flaws who didn't. It wasn't like a few trips to the therapist wouldn't help him to improve on these flaws and get back on the path to becoming a socially acceptable young man. But he saw his flaws as deep and horrible stains on his psyche that no therapist, no matter how skilled, could scrub clean. He saw himself as a broken person who would only hurt everyone around him. And tonight, he had decided that a few moments of pain for his loved ones would be far better than an entire lifetime of it. He decided that another troubled kid throwing his life away would be far better than another wife-beater or serial murderer in the world. Poor, stupid, naive kid. If only he knew what he would have become. If only he could see where he was going. The pleading became more tearful and more frantic as he fought to stifle his animalistic sobbing long enough to tear open the numerous packets of sleep aids, tiny blue pills forming an increasingly large pile on his desktop. The invisible figures tried to swat the pills out of his hand, but to no avail. He popped them all into his mouth in one deft movement and slugged them all down with a few gulps of whiskey. You stupid fuck, do you realize what you've done to yourself? He slugged down half the bottle, despite his body's protests. His esophagus convulsed violently in a vain attempt to force the poison out of his body and back onto the desktop. Moaning loudly in pain, he clutched a hand to his chest as he tightly clenched his esophagus, forcing the terribly bitter fluid to stay in place in his stomach. His head began to loll freely about on his shoulders, and his eyes began to glaze. It was already starting to take effect. It was too late now. Collapsing in defeat one by one, the figures began to sob bitterly. Many of them had to turn away. They knew what was coming. It was just like the first time he had tried this. But without enough pills or liquor, the spiders began to appear again. Just 3 at first, then 10, then 20, then 100. They began to pour out of the walls, over his bare feet, under the layer of deniment over his legs, even into his open mouth as he tried to scream. He managed only a few blood-crushed shrieks before he collapsed to the ground and began to cough violently, hands clasped tightly around his throat. For a moment, He could see the figures in the room. The drugs clouded his perception of them, and he saw them instead as grotesque banshees, shrieking arcane obscenities at him as they floated towards him and reached out to claw out his eyes. He might have been saved if he had instead seen his friends and family reaching out to him, begging him to stand up and call an ambulance. But he didn't. He curled up into a little ball and shivered violently, tears spilling freely down his cheeks as he was assaulted by grotesque vision after grotesque vision. A cluster of wind-blown branches smacking together became a vengeful man in a yellow suit, leering at him through a window and smacking the branches together. He saw a biker walk into his roommate's room and, standing over his bed and breathing heavily, began to masturbate furiously over his sleeping form. Fucking psycho was going to murder his roommate and then he'd be next. Please stop, he begged in a quivering voice as he held his hands up to shield his eyes. His veins began to separate from his hands and dancing about in cobra-like motions. Hacked his cheeks. Don't he do this, please, don't do this. Please, please. And those were his last words. His eyes rolled up behind his head, and his body went limp, skin flushing a bright red and giving away the cause of death. Heads hung, and faces buried in their hands. Those closest to him slowly drifted through the portal to return home. He promised he'd meet them all someday, but now he'd never get the chance. They'd never even get to communicate with him where he was going. He awoke in a pitch-black cave. He could only tell so because his head smacked against the walls, and his feet shifted the silt beneath them. A few cries for help with no answer, then a horrible, familiar scuttling. And he was up to his neck in spiders, all of which began to furiously sting him all over. You see, Lucifer is not a maniacal, hand-wringing tempter of souls, as he's commonly made out to be in kitschy popular culture. Remember that Lucifer was not granted his power. He was punished with it for his arrogance, for bragging to his creator and brothers about how righteous and beautiful he was. He was given the one terrible intern job none of the other angels would accept. If you ever had a chance to speak with him directly, he'd smirk and quip about how his job sorting souls for eternity tortured him more than his domain tortured the damned, before shrugging slightly and returning to work. Satan can't open the door to hell. If he could, he would have run away a long time ago. Only you can open the door to hell, and by the time you do, it's already too late to turn back.